We had started talking about law of seas already. We have spoken about what a baseline is, what internal waters are, what territorial seas are, and that was it, if I'm not mistaken. Let's repeat them first of all. First of all, you tell me, what are the two important sources of law of seas? 2 years, first of all. 58 and 82. That's good. 82 one is known as UNCLOS, so United Nations Convention on the Law of Seas. And the first one, 58 one, is composed of 4 different conventions, Geneva Conventions. So while making references, then I just make as if we have only 2 sources, 58 and 82, because it's easier for you to follow. But just keep in mind, if you should need those sources in the future for your research and so on, you know that 52 convention is composed of multiple texts. So you have to search for a text related to resources, for instance, living in the seas and what contiguous zone, what high seas are. So they're different conventions. You keep this in mind. The second thing you keep in mind is that seas are divided in between different sea blocks. What does that mean? Those blocks are sea zones. And those sea zones define what kind of rights do coastal states have there. And about the ship and the rights of the ship as well. Ships are also important. Which ship shall do what in which waters is a huge question. So ships are official ships and merchant ships. And official ships are navy ships or merchant ships again that belong to states. And merchant ships are various, as you know. They can be passenger cruise liners, they can be cargo vessels, they can be what else? Fishery boats, tankers, and so on. So they're also various. We started talking about the baseline. Baseline, you know, when the territory comes to an end, terrestrial territory comes to an end, water starts, and the measurements are not done directly where the seashore is. Measurements are done from the baseline, and baseline is the inner limit of the territorial waters. Inner limit. What remains behind baselines are known as internal waters. And what remains in the outermost parts of those baselines are known as territorial waters. Let's renew our knowledge related to internal waters. Internal waters are rivers and lakes. That's the easy part. What you should always consider, what you should never forget is that internal waters also include ports, harbors, bays as well. Because they seem as if they're on the sea, so they are part of territorial waters. No, they are internal waters. And why is that important? It's important because it's an international law clause. And it's important, therefore, on behalf of the rights of the coastal state. What happens there is that you remember that in territorial waters, we have spoken about the right of innocent passage. Innocent passage is a right that's already acknowledged by certain international treaties. This right is not acknowledged for internal waters. So there is no right for innocent passage through them. And because they're internal waters, states are also allowed to close their ports and harbors and bays as well. And there's a very famous case related to that. Normally, we do not exemplify our cases from history, but from new events. But law of seas is a huge amount of customary law. Therefore, we can go back like that. And now my example goes back to 1870, when UK ship is trying to approach a harbor in Buenos Aires, and Argentinian authorities says, you cannot enter now in our harbor. And then UK ship is, well, the shipmaster is surprised because they used to stop there. And they start a negotiation with the Argentinians, and they cannot persuade Argentinians. What happens is that parties decide to solve this issue through an international arbitrator. We'll study how dispute settlement works in international law. Well, they find an international arbitrator, one single person, the president of Chile. And the president studies what has happened there, has seen that there's a harbor in Buenos Aires and it belongs to Argentina, and UK ships used to find a shelter there, and suddenly Argentinian authorities have deprived the rights of UK ships entering to their harbors. And as a result of the research of the president, he has found out that actually it is not a must for the coastal state to open its harbors. Coastal states can also deprive the rights of the ships entering into their ports and harbors. Since then, it's accepted like that. At the moment, principle actually states leave their own ports or harbors open to foreign ships, but there are some limits. For instance, Navy harbors, Navy ports are never open to foreign ships. Secondly, if there is epidemics, then ships are not allowed to approach because of contamination risk, as you know. And when else, I guess I used to have them in my, slides. During threats as well, if the state, coastal state, feels under threat because of whatever reason, then the coastal state can again close its harbors and ports against foreign vessels. This is the most important part you're supposed to remember related to the internal waters. Let's continue then with territorial waters. Territorial waters, we have said that according to international sources, according to UNCLOS, territorial waters are measured from the baseline as 12 nautical miles. While saying this, we assume that there is no other island or no other country across the coastal country. If there is another island, of course, if those states are Greece and Turkey, for instance, they're so close to each other. You know, when 12 nautical miles is measured, then they're somehow entering into the islands of each other or territories of each other. Then the measurements are done in a different way. By the way, Turkey is not a party to those conventions, the 82 convention. We'll come to that. Well, then what happens is that those 12 nautical miles can be measured as 6 nautical miles, for instance, 3 nautical miles, depending upon how the geography allows those countries, of course. Extra measurements can be done. But while lecturing, I assume that there is nothing that the coastal state faces, it's free there, then principally it is 12 nautical miles from the baseline. And once a state is established, then the state does not need to fight for its territorial waters. Territorial waters are there automatically, just like the airspace. Once the terrestrial territory becomes the state, then the air becomes the national airspace. So the state does not need to take any extra actions. It is the case for territorial waters as well. Once the state is established, the territorial waters are automatically there. Always. Perhaps nautical miles have to be changed according to the geography, however it is. Perhaps it's not 12, but it has to be 8 or 6. But there are always some automatical territorial waters. Why is that important? It is important on behalf of jurisdiction rights of the coastal state, sovereign rights of the coastal state. The coastal state, once it has its territorial waters, then it also automatically has the airspace above the territorial waters. And the resources below the sea surface belongs also to the territorial state, coastal state. So this is the first most important part. The state is 100% sovereign on its territorial waters, and it has full jurisdiction rights in its territorial waters. Territorial waters are exclusive fishery zones of the coastal states because entire resources in that area belongs to the coastal state. Then the coastal state is also allowed to enjoy its exclusive fishery rights in those waters. And this means that the state is also allowed to set when is it okay to fish and when is it a time for stopping fishing. It is also part of the laws of that coastal state. This is how it is regulated. We have said that the state enjoys full jurisdiction rights in its territorial waters. So that jurisdiction, what we mean is criminal jurisdiction, of course. If a crime takes place in its territorial waters, then the coastal state assumes its jurisdictional rights, does the necessary investigation or arrests if it's necessary, and so on. It's a part of the independence of the state, sovereignty of the state, and jurisdiction rights of the state are extended to its territorial waters. We have said that innocent passage is not a right for internal waters, but that's a right for territorial waters. So what is an innocent passage? The first thing you should always remember is that it is a passage. So the ship is navigating through, that's a passage. So the ships are allowed to pass by. This is the first thing. Secondly, this is exclusive for merchant ships. For naval ships, they always tell that they are approaching before a threat is perceived by the coastal state. Naval ships always ask for authorization. They notify that they're approaching for passage. And perhaps, it depends in which geography it takes place. Therefore, I don't want to specify too many details right at the moment, not to confuse you. The passage must be innocent. What does that mean? It means that the passage cannot be prejudicial to the security, peace, and good order of the coastal state. All right? It cannot endanger the security, peace, and good order of the coastal state. And the passage and everything done on board must be just related to the passage. There are certain actions, if they take place, then we can say that the passage is not innocent anymore. What are they? They are actions already specified by the UN Charter. UN Charter prohibits, for instance, use of force. Then the ship, passing ship, cannot use force on the coastal state. And UN Charter prohibits states threatening each other. Then the passing ship cannot threaten the coastal state. What else? We have said that territorial sea is under full sovereignty of the coastal state. Then all resources belong to the coastal state. Then the ship that's passing by cannot exploit the resources in that sea. This means they cannot do any kind of fishing over there. The ship can have weapons on it. The coastal state is already not stopping all ships one by one and controlling what they have on board. It's not happening. On behalf of free trade, it flows. So there can be weapons on board. The thing is that the weapons, during the passage, no kind of exercise or practice can be done with those weapons. Okay, you remember we have given that example. If the state authorizes me having a gun, I can have it. But if I start showing it to you, then this is not okay. You know that I'm threatening you somehow. So you know that a threat against you. This is the case as well. Weapons can be there. But you remember that picture when the Russian soldier has already a missile launcher on his shoulder. This is a threat against Turkey then. And threatening is then not an innocent act. Any act that involves collecting information. So intelligence activities actually against the coastal state are prohibited because probably they are against the defense of the coastal state. So collecting information is not looking for the phone number of one person, of course. It is something that's prejudicial to the that constitutes prejudice to the defense of the coastal state. What else? Any kind of propaganda that endangers again security, peace, system of that state. That's also prohibited. Any kind of aircrafts, they cannot take off or land. They cannot start during the passage. During the passage, the ship cannot pollute the waters. During the passage, the ship cannot load or unload any kind of commodities, money, or people. Because if it's people, then it can be related to illegal migration, as you know. Or if it's about money, commodities, then it's also regulated by some other terms. It cannot happen during the passage. Fishing activities cannot take place, of course. Or surveys, research. We'll talk about it, where states can conduct their research and surveys, but not in territorial waters of other states. Communication systems of the coastal states cannot be harmed, cannot be damaged during passage. What can that be? That can be giving harm to fiber optics of that country, for instance, that are laid on the sea base, for instance. Or jammers are not allowed. And anything that has nothing to do with the passage shouldn't be done. All right? Could you follow everything related to innocent passage? So you know then which passage, first of all, it's a passage, that kind of a navigation. Secondly, it has to be okay with the defense, with the peace, security, good order of the coastal state. They cannot fish, they cannot pollute, they cannot load, unload any kind of goods or people. Aircraft cannot land on or take off. And intelligence cannot be collected. Good. We have said that the coastal state has full jurisdiction rights in its territorial waters. And when I mention jurisdiction rights, what I refer to is criminal jurisdiction, of course. The state, it's like that on board, on the ship, a criminal activity takes place. And then the coastal state assumes its rights for jurisdiction. How does that take place? Of course, first of all, the state should know about it, right? For the Khashoggi case, the girlfriend was outside, so she has started that the boyfriend entered there, fiancé entered there, and has never gone out once again. And then jurisdiction rights of Turkey were activated. This is the case as well. First of all, the coastal state must know about the crime. How does that happen? The coastal state is either somehow affected by that criminal activity. Then, of course, the coastal state knows about the crime, and the coastal state is affected by the consequences of the crime. Then they start a jurisdiction against that ship. When else? When the crime directly targets the coastal state, then the coastal state assumes its jurisdiction rights. What else? The captain of the ship can inform the authorities of the coastal state. The shipmaster can ask for assistance, can ask for help for the crimes happening or for the crime that has happened on board. Or, as you know, we talk about flagships. So the ship has a flag. The ship is registered somewhere. Most of the ships are registered where? Which country?
The US?
Nope.
Panama.
Panama, that's true. Most of the ships are registered. Why is that so? Why most of the ships are registered by Panama?
Tax reasons, probably.
Definitely, because of taxation system of Panama. And okay, before I give you some details, let's talk about it then in high seas. The thing is that the ship belongs to one country. And the diplomats, diplomatic agents, counselors of that country informs the coastal state about what has happened on board. And they can ask for assistance. Then the coastal state can start investigations. It can start any kind of arrests or anything necessary related to the crime on that board. The thing is that, imagine now, ship is sailing through and the crime has taken place. Someone has heard of it, informed the coastal state, and the security forces of the coastal state takes action. Perhaps until this process comes to an end, the ship leaves the territorial waters. What happens then? Does anyone know, or do you want to guess? I can repeat then before you answer. It's a long process. First of all, a crime happens on board and the ship is sailing. It's not stopping, of course. It's an innocent passage, right? So they're passing by. And during its navigation, someone tells the coastal state that a crime has happened on board. And then the state has motivated its security forces to do something against that crime, and security forces are mobilized and they have to find the ship. Perhaps in that time period, the ship has already left the territorial waters of the coastal state. Then what happens to the jurisdiction rights of the coastal state? You have an answer for that?
I'm guessing that it is an intentional going out of the territorial sea, then coastal state may have a right to chase this ship in high waters as well, unlike the principle, because in high waters there is no jurisdiction of any countries. But if it's the case, as you gave the example, then it may, I think, the coastal state may follow the ship in the high waters as well.
Normally, if a crime happens, terrorists, for instance, they make an attack, and security forces start to follow them. They're escaping. The security forces of the country, of that state, are allowed to follow the terrorists until the border. That's why in movies we always see that criminals are passing the border to Mexico, you know. Then the US security forces remain weak after the border. They can't do anything because jurisdiction area comes to an end, right? That's typical. This limitation does not exist in seas. In the seas, once a criminal, always a criminal, and the coastal state is always allowed to follow, find, bring it back, start jurisdiction. It cannot take place in terrestrial territories, but it can take place in waters. In the waters, it's completely okay to chase the criminals.
Even inside the other coastal waters of another state?
Yes, yes.
Hocam,
Yes.
does that have any logic, or is that the way they for years?
Customary law.
Okay.
Customary law has emerged like that.
Okay.
Then let's move to the contiguous zone. Contiguous zone is the next 12 nautical miles after territorial waters. Watch out, never forget something. We have said that territorial waters exist automatically. Once the statehood is established, then the seas belong to it automatically. How about contiguous zone? It is never automatic. This means contiguous zone must be claimed. United Nations. Yes. Why is that so? Because they make certain calculations. First of all, they do the measurements, what happens by the next 12 nautical miles, if there are any other islands, any other countries, if there are any other zones that they have to watch out, then they specify if there's anything. Because perhaps, actually, I don't remember if I have specified this in this class, but of course, I mean, like Turkey and Greece, we have said, they're so close so that they cannot use their 12 nautical miles always. Then those countries, if they're so close, or if there's a state and an island, then they cannot use their 12 nautical miles. They have to find a compromise, like let's use it as 8 miles, for 6 miles, 3 miles, whatever, however it can be arranged. This is also the case for the contiguous zone. Contiguous zone has to be claimed. Its maximum is 12 nautical miles, assuming that there are no other territories facing the coastal state. All right? If there's anything else, then it can be perhaps measured down. So, contiguous zone does not appear automatically. It must be claimed, and from the United Nations it is claimed. Secondly, we always say that we assess sea zones according to the sovereignty rights of the coastal states. So what rights does the coastal state enjoy in contiguous zone? Contiguous zone of the coastal states is a place, a zone, where limited powers are enjoyed by the coastal state. What limited powers? They are control rights. So the coastal state is allowed to control 4 different issue areas. What are they? They are, as seen here, customs. Customs control can be done. Fiscal controls can be done. Migration controls can be done, and sanitary controls. According to what are they controlled? According to the regulations of the coastal state. So while a ship is approaching, if the coastal state has the suspect that there are animals on board and they can be carrying certain epidemics, there are human beings that are contaminated by something, sanitary controls are done for that. This was a quiz question of mine, I guess 2 semesters ago. I asked what kind of rights are enjoyed by the coastal state in the contiguous zone, and someone told me that the coastal state tests the hygiene of the waters in contiguous zone. Sanitary has nothing to do with the hygiene of the waters. It has something to do with the health conditions on board. Okay? Kolibasile and so on, it's not matter here what we mentioned. Customs and fiscal. All nations have their own trade regulations, fiscal regulations, and related to the economic system of that country. For instance, some countries do not accept certain monies, for instance, for their countries. Or they can have certain customs issues, like certain amounts of goods are allowed, or certain standards are imposed. So that kind of controls can be done in the contiguous zone. All right? And in contiguous zone, for instance, if illegal immigration is detected, then the shipmaster and so on can be subjected to the jurisdiction of the coastal state. So you were bringing illegal immigrants to my country. You know how it starts. So what you should always remember is that contiguous zone is for control reasons, and those controls are limited to 4 issue areas that are customs, fiscal, immigration, and sanitary. And now you know what sanitary means. Okay. You have a question? Yes.
Why the control is done in contiguous zone rather than territorial waters?
Good question. Actually, this has emerged like that. This is a kind of customary law. And once it's in territorial waters, for instance, when you think about epidemics, it can be so late. It is so close and your country is already contaminated, for instance. For the immigrants, either people run away from your country or they're trying to unload those migrants into your country, then it's too close perhaps. So that's the logic. Yes, that's what I was about to mention. This is again part of customary international law, and it is recoded into treaties once again. It appeared in the Convention on the Territorial Sea, it says. What do I mean with that sentence? I forgot to mention something there, but I don't know if you have understood which source is that. Geneva Convention of which year? That's the most important part. Oh, no.
58.
58, definitely. So this is Geneva Convention on the Territorial Sea and Contiguous Zone. It has a long name. And this source is 58 source. We have two sources. This is the 58 one. And this has coded the use of contiguous zone in its text. By the way, I just have recently added this sentence to my slides for you because this is happening recently, that actually contiguous zone is a control zone. It is not a zone for fisheries, it's not a zone for exploiting the sources and so on. But recently, as foreign ships were in contiguous zones of the coastal state, they were doing scuba diving and so on, and they have found some archaeological remains on the seabed. They have collected them, put them on board and brought them. Later, after coastal state has noticed what has happened, they said that historical remains belong to the history of those territories. And you have removed them. This cannot be legal. Bring them back. And it has worked. So it somehow recently, if you come across, then you should be knowledgeable. That's why I have added. Recently, we have seen that archaeological and historical remains are also considered to be belonging to that coastal state as the owner of the contiguous zone. Are you confused until here related to territorial waters, contiguous zone, baseline, internal waters? Yes, please.
Can there ever be an overlap between two contiguous zones of two sovereign states?
That's why it is claimed by the United Nations. They regulate it to avoid this happening. So until now, we have studied internal waters, baseline, territorial waters, and contiguous zone. What remains is exclusive economic zone, continental shelf, high seas, international waters, and international straits. Let's continue with exclusive economic zone. Exclusive economic zone is measured from the baseline as maximum 200 nautical miles. This is not an automatic zone. It must be claimed by the United Nations, by the coastal state. Coastal state makes an application by the UN saying that we want to have our exclusive economic zone. Then UN makes the calculations and measurements and tells if it's okay or if there shall be certain geographical shapes given to that. It has to be shortened, whatever is specified by the UN. And why do states want to have exclusive economic zone? What's the use of it? Or what kind of rights do coastal states have on their exclusive economic zones? Exclusive economic zone is formulated in order to enable the coastal state enjoying its rights over energy resources. So there are energy resources in exclusive economic zones, and the coastal state wants to claim its EEZ in order to benefit from those sources. The first sources that you can mention are what? Of course, oil and gas. In addition to that, we can also mention ocean tribunes. The coastal state is allowed to install ocean tribunes to the seabed. Because as you know, 200 nautical miles is already far away, and there's probably a huge flow over there, and it can make the tribunes turn and produce electricity for the coastal state. The coastal states are allowed to install them. Or coastal states are also allowed to establish wind farms in the exclusive economic zones over the oceans, because that's also for energy reasons. Well, we're living in Turkey, and since, I was about to say 6 months, but I guess it has been much longer since here, Turkey is having some troubles in the Mediterranean related to the oil and gas drills. Does anyone remember what's happening? Do you know what I'm talking about? Batu, please.
In Cyprus, the southern Cyprus government has leased off certain portions of their exclusive economic zone companies like Total, British Petroleum to drill for gas and oil. But Turkey is claiming that the Turkish Cypriots also have a claim.
True.
So
And what are the other elements of the problem? Does anyone then?
Israel has also taken part, Greece. So they're trying to bypass Turkey with the pipeline.
By bypassing Turkey, I have one question. Does Turkey have its exclusive economic zone or not? Does anyone know? Is it claimed? Someone answers, but I can't find who that is. Yes, please.
I don't think Turkey has exclusive economic zone.
Turkey did not claim it.
Yes.
Turkey has been so late. Another question. Why Southern Cyprus does not drill the entire oil on its own so that it can have the entire profits, but shares it with Egypt and Israel and Exxon and Total and British Petroleum? I'm not so sure about British Petroleum, but perhaps. Why do they share it? That's typical for sea drillings. Drilling in the terrestrial territory is not that expensive. It's a couple of millions of dollars. In the seas, that drilling costs really much. So the price that I'm talking about is something around $500 million. So on. Therefore, the states come together, they establish condominiums, they also invite private companies so that they, first of all, need to share the costs. What has to be done is not something so easy that the coastal state simply claims its exclusive economic zone and then says, I'll drill around until I find some oil. It's not like that. First of all, they're scanning to find out the potential places for minerals. After they find it out, they need to drill, of course, and drilling is so costly because it's happening in the waters. After the drilling, if they reach to oil, let's say, they have to take samples. First of all, from which depth is that oil coming? If it's too deep, then it costs too much to pump it out. If you're Saudi Arabia, you have the oil in 1 meter deep from your territory, and the quality is also high, you don't need to refine it much. Then the cost you're putting for drilling is really less. Quality of the oil is high, so you don't pay much for the refinement, and you directly sell it. So you see that the profits are so high. If it's happening in the seas, samples are taken, first of all, from which depth the oil is found. Secondly, after the sample is taken, what is the quality of the oil? Sometimes the quality is not as high as expected. Then huge process of refinement is necessary. This means extra costs still. So as you see, drilling in the sea is a very complicated process. It's so costly and it takes so much time. Therefore, states are not enjoying this profits alone, but they need to share the burden with other economic sources like states, like private companies. So as you have mentioned, yes, Turkey did not claim its exclusive economic zone from the United Nations, and there are many question marks at that point as well. Who is going to ask for it? If Turkey is going to ask for it, does Turkey claim Southern Cyprus as a part of its territory or not? If it's not, then if it's Northern Cyprus claiming its exclusive economic zone, its statehood comes under scrutiny if it's a state. And if yes, then what are the limits? Should it then include Turkish territories? Is it going to be shared territories? Is it going to be separate? So such questions are debated at the moment in international platforms. You have a question?
Is Northern Cyprus recognized by the United Nations or member of the United Nations?
Who wants to answer? How is that?
No, it's not.
It is not. It's not. So now you know the use of exclusive economic zone. It is there, it is claimed on behalf of energy exploitation, use of energy resources. Energy does not only mean oil and gas. Yes, they're of course an important portion of that, but they also include like wind farms or ocean tribunes as well. How about fishing? Actually, the documents are telling that exclusive economic zones are specific for energy resources, but nothing else. But we know that at the moment it's changing. States are also fishing there. That's why sea life is being endangered. Normally it was planned like that in the very beginning, in the establishment of the law of seas. In international waters, fishes are completely free. They reproduce. They lay their eggs, and then fishes come out, and then they decide in which waters should they take the turns. And if they enter your territorial waters, then those fishes become the resources of the coastal state. So this is how it was planned. But later, the states started to extend their rights to the contiguous zone, to their exclusive economic zone, and this is somehow endangering the sea life. Yes, states are fishing there, and it is not fishing only for frying them, eating them with chips, as you know. States are going fishing for industrial reasons as well, and the amounts that are necessary are huge for the industry. So at the moment, we know that states are going fishing, and that was not the aim in the very beginning. Continental shelf. Continental shelf is actually a geographical fact rather than a legal one. You remember it already from your high school times, what a continental shelf is. Continental shelf is the natural prolongation of the continent that continues below the sea surface. And well, all pieces of territories have it. Some continental shelves are large and some of them are shorter, smaller. It's a geographical artifact. And states have started to extend their economic claims in line with their continental shelves. Like United States having its continental shelf until UK, so everything belongs to me on that. Well, it's not the case, by the way. I'm just trying to exemplify how it goes. Therefore, international law is trying to find some limits for continental shelf, and the limit is 350 nautical miles. The claims for continental shelf cannot exceed 350 nautical miles. Sorry. Yes, because it's the prolongation of the continent, therefore it starts from the continent itself, from the baseline. And the use of continental shelf is the same with the exclusive economic zone. The coastal states have rights to look for oil and gas on their continental shelves. I don't want to confuse you a lot, but from time to time it is necessary to bring legal knowledge together with international relations events. Now I'll start, but I don't want it turning into a discussion and how is it, and I won't specify too many details related to that. The Ege's question in between Greece and Turkey. Turkey is not a party to UNCLOS 82. Greece is. Therefore, Turkey does not accept 12 nautical miles claim. And Turkey rests its claims over continental shelf. So the islands are also natural prolongation of the Anatolian continent, and this is how Turkish claims are established. What I'm telling you is a very rough part of the problem, of course. You still need a lot of information to discuss it. I don't want to start this discussion at the moment. That's just an introduction to law of seas. But at least you know how to assess roughly that trouble. Now, we have two things left. International straits and high waters. International straits are a little bit complicated. Perhaps it's better if I start with international waters. International waters belong to whom? And everyone, both of them. So all states have equal rights there. And it sounds, while discussing things related to international waters, related to high waters, students tend to believe that you can take the ship to high waters, do whatever you want, because everything is free there, and then come back. It is never the case. This is the most important thing you have to keep in mind. Yes, high waters are promising the ships a lot of rights, a lot of freedoms. But those freedoms do not mean that you can take the ship there and do whatever you want and then come back. We have said that ships belong to countries. They are registered by countries. This means the legal infrastructure on that ship is the same with the legal infrastructure of the state that it is registered to. So if the ship is registered to Iran, if the ship is registered to Turkey, to Netherlands, then what can be done on the ship is defined by the laws, legal terms in Iran, in Turkey and Netherlands. This is the thing. So human cloning is not allowed in Turkey. On a Turkish ship, you cannot just go to high seas, clone human beings and then come back. If it's a crime in Turkey, it's a crime on board as well. Secondly, yes, there are many freedoms in international waters. What freedoms are they? Those freedoms are navigation freedom. How is that in Turkish? Seyr-ü sefer hakkı. So, if you're going to take some state exams, it's better if you know them. States have navigation rights in high waters, so they can take the path, they can pass by, they can use international waters for their own navigation purposes. States have research rights. They can conduct research in international waters. And all states are also allowed to lay fiber optic cables then to international waters. States can also lay pipelines in international waters. That's a real event. I don't know if you have ever noticed that. That was 2015. A Russian submarine was in high waters, and it's started to rest somewhere so close to international cables, internet cables. After that was noticed, people were afraid if they're planning something like cutting off the fiber optics and leaving the entire world without internet. That did not take place, but that was the fear. That was what you could see in the news. So data cables are protected by international law. And if there are oil pipelines, gas pipelines, then they're also protected by international law. And crimes that happen in international waters do not remain unpunished. They either have a punishment related to domestic laws, because ships belong to certain states, or according to international law. In international waters, what we often come across is piracy. In recent years, Somalian piracy was a huge question mark. And they were damaging the ships and conducting robberies. The question is that, who is in charge of international waters? Who is going to find those criminals and punish them? Either because they're Somalian pirates, it's possible for the rest of the world waiting for Somalian justice taking place. They find their own citizens and punish them. This is one option. The other option is universal jurisdiction. Do you remember what it is? We have already studied universal jurisdiction to a certain extent. Yes?
If punishments take place regardless of borders by any ex-country, it is universal jurisdiction.
This means who does the jurisdiction?
Any state can.
Any state, that's it. Therefore, I don't know if I have it among my slides. Against Somalian piracy, numerous states have decided to assume jurisdiction rights, like Russia, like China, like France and UK and US. So if they can chase and catch those Somalian pirates, they will conduct jurisdiction vis-à-vis them. So crimes in international waters do not remain unpunished. Before moving to Arctic, this is so complicated. Let's move to international straits. First of all, what is a strait? What do we call a strait?
A sea line that connects two different seas.
A sea line that connects two different seas. And do you want to make some reference related to territories?
It also
Terrestrial territories, where are they?
they squeeze that sea line I mentioned.
True. There are at least two pieces of territories that are so close, and there's a narrow sea line in between that's connecting seas to each other. Straits are, for most of the time, shortcuts for the sailors. Instead of taking a huge navigation route, they can simply go through the straits and find a shortcut for themselves. So this means foreign vessels used to, in history that's the case, because they are shortcuts, they used to take those international straits to reach where they want, but they are coming so close to territories. This means they're either passing through the territorial waters of other states or contiguous zone, whatever. What we know is that according to the 58 Convention, again, on territorial seas, we learned that there shall be no suspension of the innocent passage right. So, first thing you learn about international straits is that there's a right for innocent passage through international straits. There are 4 major straits in the world. There are many other straits, but those are the major ones, mostly used ones or most sensitive ones. Turkish Straits. It was one of my quiz questions once again, just naming the Turkish Straits. And believe me, many failed. What are Turkish Straits?
Istanbul and Dardanelles.
Dardanelles and Bosphorus, that's true. Gibraltar Strait, Strait of Magellan, and Malacca Strait. I have also placed the maps for them. So Turkish straits are Bosphorus and Dardanelles. Strait of Gibraltar is passing in between two different states. Morocco and Spain. And we have studied Corfu case as well, right? That was exam question. That's true. And I have it somewhere. Yes. The Magellan Strait is very famous shortcut for the sailors. As you see, this is how the ships prefer sailing instead of making this huge move. So it explains a lot already once you see the map, how it seems. Or Malaccan one, in between Malaysia. And you remember the case of Corfu. That was a case of what? State responsibility, good. So here, there was a passage. In the exam, you have forgotten to assess the case of United Kingdom, that it makes, there's a faulty act, but it does not give damage. So it was not specified on most of the papers, but some did, of course. I don't need to talk about Corfu case once again then. You have learned it enough. Good. Now, we're going to study the Montreux Treaty and the case of Turkish Straits, because this is the most sensitive one. Why is that sensitive? It's so sensitive because it is a strait, especially Bosphorus one, is going through a metropole, going through a city where civilians are living. It is so narrow. And one side of that strait is Black Sea. So those states that are coastal to Black Sea must pass through Turkish straits to reach other seas. They don't have a plan B for that. So this is the sensitivity of Turkish straits. And Turkish straits are regulated by the treaty done in 1936, the Montreux Agreement. According to Montreux Treaty, all merchant ships have innocent passage rights. But merchant ships, pay attention to that, not navy ships. We'll come to that. And Turkish state would only do health controls when necessary, if epidemics are approaching to Turkey or what. That strait in Istanbul is really tight. It's so narrow. So it can be dangerous. And I guess we have seen one slide on which one merchant ship crashes on a mansion on Bosphorus. So it is dangerous to pass by, but ordering a guide rests upon the request. Note it down, I'll come back to your question. If Turkey perceives threats, then Turkish state can ask ships to pass only over the daytime so that observation can be done. This means sun has to be there. This means daytime. So we don't talk about what time is it. It changes from season to season. And it's calculated daily in Turkey for prayer times. So morning prayer times is when the sun goes up. This is when the ships then start. And after the evening prayers, then we know that sun is not there anymore. So it's changing. Hours are changing. The thing is that the sun must be there. It has to be sun. It must be a daytime so that observation can be done. What ships are passing by. If Turkey is in war with any country, then the ships of that country cannot pass, of course. Makes sense, right? And if Turkey is suspicious about the ships of other countries that can be carrying munition, arsenal, kind of other goods to the enemy, then Turkey can also deprive the rights of those ships to pass through. Okay? Now, let's talk about warships. We have said that innocent passage is there for merchant ships. But how about warships? Warships, it's like that. First of all, we have to make a distinction in between warships of the countries that reside in Black Sea region and the rest of the world. For the rest of the world, only classified tankers can pass. So either they're passing by to buy oil or gas or fresh water, that's it. And as for the navy ships of Black Sea region, certain ships can pass, certain ships cannot. Submarines cannot. Which version of battleship is the hugest? Definitely, they cannot. And one has passed. I don't know if you have heard of it. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was with K, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was Ismail Cem, and Ecevit was the Prime Minister. And then, but the thing is that it was cleaned off of its entire weapons, first of all. And it was promised before Turkish Republic was established. How was the name? Yes, Russian ship. It passed on the 4-1s with K. Krusk değildi. Ah my. I'll find it out for you. I'll find that story for you. But they cannot normally. Because it's, as you know, Bosphorus, it's so narrow, it's so dangerous, it takes many turns, and there are mansions, houses, and civilians living there. Therefore, it is not allowed. It can be so dangerous. And all other navy ships that are allowed to pass, yes, they are allowed to. But first of all, authorization is necessary. They have to tell that they're approaching. They have to ask for permission. Authorization is necessary. A prior notification has to be sent to Turkey that a warship is approaching, a warship of Ukraine, Russia, whatever, Georgia. So one does not simply pass their navy ships through the Turkish straits. It is classified. Other states and Black Sea states, other states classified tankers can pass. From Black Sea region, their navy ships can pass by prior notification, and certain ships can still not pass, like those huge aircraft carriers or submarines. Do you have any questions? Let's start from here.
Why is there an obligation to have a guide ship while passing through the Bosphorus?
I'm also asking that question. That must be actually, if you're seeing it from the Turkish side, we're saying that at least 2 people are necessary, one guide ship and one person to be next to the ship master captain, because they know about the turns of the Bosphorus.
So they don't know the positions of the seas or how waves hit to the ships, and huge ships mostly pass through the Bosphorus. So that case and the historical building was so upsetting.
Definitely.
Not just the building in the inside, there was so wealthy historical pieces too. And
True.
I think it should be an obligation to have a guide ship while there are so many historical things around the Bosphorus.
That's so true, but this is how Montreux Agreement is formulated. And that ship that has hit on that mention, it was offered to get one guide, and they refused it, and when they refused, Turkish authorities can't do anything. Sinan?
Do none of these regulations on international straits apply to artificial straits like Suez, Panama, Volga, even Kanal Istanbul?
They apply. They apply. The thing is that, for instance, Montreux is specific for Turkish straits. So there's, for instance, innocent passage right belongs to international law. And therefore, it also applies to all other straits, artificial ones as well. But Montreux is specific for the Bosphorus. So new regulations are necessary when so necessary. Yes, ma'am.
My question is the one, Mr. Williams one. If, like, there would be a Kanal Istanbul construction, and what would be the, like, situation of the moment?
As I told, actually, we cannot know prior. First of all, the case takes place and then international law is established. The thing is that we know that there are certain elements of international law related to international straits. So like innocent passage right is there for merchant ships. It's going to be applying for Kanal Istanbul if it takes place. But perhaps related to, again, warships of Black Sea region, we will need new regulations, new treaties have to be formulated perhaps. There are many questions related to Montreux. Sometimes we cannot decide if a ship should be classified as a warship or not, or if the entity should be named as a ship or not, because technology is so advanced and there is no captain. I don't know the word for that. You know, there's a huge, how is that thing called to give direction to the ship? That thing does not exist in some turning wheel. I'm not sure if it's, but you know what I'm talking about. Some ships do not have that turning wheel on it. And some ships have different engines in that. They're not typical to ships. So an entity is approaching, but we cannot name it as a traditional ship. And Montreux is regulating how ships are passing. So merchant ships, naval ships, how about the entity approach? So there are many question marks related to Montreux actually. Yes, please.
Can we modify Montreux? Because Montreux regulated as a sailboat. Rüzgara göre düşünülerek
You know what? We have studied law of treaties, and you have seen that once a treaty is completed, it can also be adjusted, or certain things can be changed, but they require a huge process. Conferences should take place. All parties should show consent. After the signature, ratification should also take place. So it's a very lofty process. It perhaps can be done because technological advancements require that. You're right. Yes.
Hocam, we said that if Turkey feel threats, then they have right to control in the Bosphorus or something. But if they Turkey feels threat not against for itself but for another country, let's say, for example, there's a ship and passing through Bosphorus for a crime against Russia. Then Turkey
Listen,
will have right.
crime. You have to define what that crime is. Corruption is a crime. Human trafficking, drugs trafficking is a crime. Terrorism is a crime. International crimes can also be subject to universal jurisdiction, therefore Turkey can take action. But against bribery, for instance, Turkey can't do anything. That's something domestic. So depends on the nature of the crime that you're talking about.
But it's still threat. There's no still crime.
But it's not a threat for Turkey. Therefore, we cannot name it as a threat. But then we talk about an international crime to be committed. A genocide is going to take place. War crimes are going to take place. Illicit trafficking, human trafficking, terrorists are on board. Then universal jurisdiction can enter into the play and then Turkey can take action. But otherwise,
And
No.
was it the word you were looking for gyroscope?
Can be, I'm not sure. Thank you for that. You have a question? Yes, please.
Are NATO ships also subject to the same restrictions?
Definitely, definitely. They tell Turkey that they're approaching, and if they're classified ships, what kind of ships, and then they enter into the Bosphorus. Yes,
I think you answered, but let me ask again.
of course.
Does the Turkish authority always check what's inside in the merchant ships?
No, never. Almost never. You know what? It's something that would slow down the entire free trade. So states do not control all ships one by one. It would take days just to search one ship. Therefore, it is not always done. But for contiguous zone, if the coastal state has certain suspicions, then it is done. But not all ships are searched one by one for what they have. It's so against free trade and the flow of trade. Therefore, it's not done.
They do this because of the customer laws related to the international trade, or
Customs, you mean probably, not customers. Yes, when they are suspicious, then they do so. True. I have seen some hands, yes.
Hocam, do all states have this kind of agreements, or?
No, this one is the most sensitive one. Therefore,
Okay, so I mean, it is somewhat a bind on our sovereignty. I mean, because if we are totally sovereign, we can say we want to close our space for one day, for example, but we can't because there's an agreement. Can other states?
how about
do
innocent
that?
passage? How do you assess innocent passage, right?
No,
Because
I,
it's your territory, but everybody can pass by.
yes. If we are totally sovereign, then we could say it doesn't matter if you are innocent. We want to close it down for a day. For example, we can't do it because there's an agreement.
Because we can, simply.
Yeah, because we can. But are all canals and straits have that thing, or are there any totally sovereign canals? Or
No, there are like that. Total closed ones, you mean? There are no closed ones. So all of them have innocent passage right. And innocent passage right belongs to international law. So it is applicable on all kinds of straits. It's not applicable, it's a norm. They're always open, therefore. Okay? Any other questions that I did not answer? Sinan.
Does profiting from the passing ships count as infringement?
Friendly relations, amicable relations, good international relations, good diplomacy. That's the answer. I'm not kidding.
Really?
Definitely. You're not setting barriers to other states. So, yes.
how does a state respond when it is violated by, let's say, warcraft without any permission?
Who is violated by a work? How is that, once
Let me
again?
give you an example. Let's
Okay.
say Russian aircraft is passing through the strait without any permission.
They cannot.
They can't.
Aircraft carrier cannot. A navy ship, a battleship perhaps can.
Let's say battleship.
Okay.
And how does Turkey counter?
I still don't get the question. If they start an attack, if they start an attack, then Turkey takes all possible self-defense measures. But it is already promised. I mean, it's going to be a passage. It's just a passage. And innocent passage is also known by Russia what it means. Therefore, they already promise. You know, it is the basis of international law, Pacta sunt servanda. They know what the rule is. And therefore, we take that, Turkish side takes that, Russia promises not to attack during the passage. Is it all? No questions? So you understood everything well?
We need to read it again at the.
Clean off your desks. Let's have a quiz.